All right, y'all, what's going on, man? Welcome to the podcast with Soul. You could also listen to all of my content on the podcast with Soul on Spotify, the podcast with Soul on Instagram, the podcast with Soul on Spotify, the podcast with Soul on YouTube. Astigmatism in My Soul, the podcast with Soul, Gumby Publishing, myself, Sean Xavier Gumby Sr., and my son, Sean Xavier Gumby Jr. None of us wish to slander, libel, or defame anybody as it relates to this court case that we're discussing, which is the United States of America versus Dion Lamont Gatlin, which we all know as Cuffy. This is all public information. You can download this information online. It's publicly available, and we're going to be discussing it today as we have been going forward. So, what we're going to do, I already dealt with, today we're going to deal with Keith Cromer. And for the next couple of days, we're going to deal with Keith Cromer at the Franks hearing. Okay? I think I did one or two videos already about this, but I just want to recap because it's been about a week or so since I did a video, and we're gonna really, go into the weeds on Keith Cromer the next couple of days. So I want to recap everybody and bring everybody up to speed. So the document we're going to come from today is excerpts A, B, and C of Volume 3 of the Franks hearing. Okay? You can get this online. Dated October 19th, 2016. This is the redacted transcript. Initially, we know that when they subpoena Keith Cromer to come to St. Louis and testify, he lets the court know, yo, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right. So, can we do it by phone? The judge is like, you're gonna invoke your Fifth Amendment right? He says yes. She says bet. No need for you to fly up here from Atlanta to St. Louis in order to get on the stand and tell us you're gonna invoke your Fifth Amendment right. So we'll do everything by phone. So here comes the day, October 19, 2016. They get on the phone. Keith Cromer's in Atlanta with his lawyer, Mr. Thomas, Welby, the judge, Hogue, Riley, all the U.S. attorneys, Herman, Humphrey, and Trog, and Cuffy and them, Rush, Tim Rush, Andres. They're all in the courtroom, and they're listening to this, the helicopter right there. They're listening to all of this by phone. So they swear Keith Cromer in, and the first question, and I went over this, the first question that Stephen Welby asks Keith Cromer is, in August of 2012, did you deliberately provide false material information to DEA agents in St. Louis, knowing it would be included in an affidavit for a Title III wiretap of Mr. Dion Gatlin's phone, or Cuffy? Mr. Thomas and Cromer are messing around on the phone. They can't get their stories straight. He comes out and says, I'm invoking my Fifth Amendment right, and declined to answer that question. That's question number one. Welby comes back with a subsequent question, the very next question. In August 2012, did you tell CS1 or Tammy Cowins to deliberately provide false material information to DE agents in St. Louis, knowing that information would be included in an affidavit for a Title III wiretap of Cuffy's phone? Keith Cromer answers no. He invoked his Fifth Amendment right on question number one. The second question he answers. Welby asks him another question. This is the third question. Did you tell Tammy Cowins to tell Demetrius Flannery that she should tell the DEA agents that Demetrius Flannery was going to receive a cut of the proceeds of drug dealings between Dion Gatlin and Demetrius Flannery, but they really meant to say between Dion Gatlin and Fidel Suarez? Keith Cromer and his attorney Thomas, they can't get themselves together. They're talking on the phone. The judges say, yo, answer the question. The defense attorney Herman and jumps up and says, Your Honor, I object to Cromer's lawyer, interfering with the questions every time we ask him a question. Then Herman also says that the fact that Cromer answered the second question, he's waived his right to invoke his Fifth Amendment. The U.S. attorney jumps up and says, yes, I agree. Welby jumps up and says, yes, I agree. So the judge then tells Cromer and his attorney Thomas that, yo, we're not going to be able to do this by phone. You're going to have to get up here by Friday. So she orders them to come up here, go to St. Louis by Friday. So Friday comes and they get Keith Cromer on the stand, and they talk about, get Keith Cromer on the stand, and at this point, he's going to answer his questions. They lead out, Thomas leads out, his attorney leads out, and they go through all of this and saying that he's going to invoke his Fifth Amendment right on a question-by-question basis, and him and the judge are going back and forth, and the judge is like, nah, he's already waived his right, and if the defense attorneys ask him a good question, I'm going to compel him to answer. And Cromer's lawyer comes back and says, well, if you do that, I am going to file language that, this was compelled testimony, that it wasn't voluntary testimony. And she's like, fine. So they continue on with the questioning. So they lead out, and Stephen Welby comes right back to the same questions. Did you tell CS1 to advise the DEA agents in St. Louis in August of 2012 that Demetrius Flannery was supposed to get a cut of the proceeds of drug transactions between Fidel Suarez and Cuffy? Keith Cromer says, no, Tammy Cowins told me that. Then he says that he told that information to the DEA agents in St. Louis, and let me read it. No, she told me that, and then I imparted that information through initial discussions, but I believe that was before August 2012. Now this is important because when we get into the new information, Keith Cromer is going to testify on the stand that he met Tammy Cowins in 2010 at a debriefing with Jack Harvey in 2010. Now, up until this point, and correct me if I'm wrong, all the paperwork that we've read has suggested that Keith Cromer doesn't meet Tammy Cowins until July 2011 when Jack Harvey retires. And Jack Harvey even states this, that he hands Tammy Cowins over to Keith Cromer after they get finished knocking off Terry White. And Jack Harvey puts Tammy Cowins in for an award. And from what the paperwork, the way it read as if that Keith Cromer doesn't meet her until 2011 at Jack Harvey's retirement. But the new information, we're going to find out that it goes back to 2010. Keith Cromer. No, she told me that. And then I imparted that information through initial discussions. But I believe that was before August of 2012. That was prior to August 2012 with that information. When I had my initial conversation, when I spoke to the agents out of St. Louis, I explained to them how the numbers came up. The information that was provided to the confidential source, Tammy Cowins, and who provided Tammy Cowins with that information. Because the gentleman you just said, I don't know. He's talking about Cuffy. The gentleman who you say, I think they call him Meech or something, I believe that's his name. He was in prison with Fidel. And Fidel and him worked out an agreement that Meech would set up Fidel with a friend of his, which is Cuff, to get together and sell drugs. So that's the only thing I knew. So when I talked to the agents in St. Louis, instead of me, I told them initially, but I asked them, do you want to speak to Tammy Cowins? When they said yes, I patched Tammy Cowins through her phone, and the agents spoke to Tammy Cowins themselves. So there was no reason for me to explain anything. We're done. At that point, we let St. Louis run the ball game from that point. Welby, did you ever tell Tammy Cowins to lie to DEA agents in St. Louis about anything concerning Cuffy? Keith Cromer, no sir. I didn't even know. I want you to understand, I've never seen him. I didn't even know what his name was. I just had the nickname Cuff. That's all I need. And so they kind of like forcing him to answer the questions. So this is part of the testimony from the Friday when they make him fly up from Atlanta after doing the phone joint. So this is the continuation, Frank's hearing, transcript of the Frank's hearing, redacted transcript, volume 5, right? So this was pretty interesting. You know, a lot of this is redacted. Let me show y'all how this looked. So a lot of it is like this. There's one page, 2 page, another page, another page. A lot of it is blacked out, okay? So what's going on here before they get into the cross-examination of Keith Cromer, they're trying to figure out, the judge, the U.S. attorney, Welby and Herman are trying to figure out, you know, what questions can we ask him, right? You know, what's the deal with him taking the Fifth Amendment in question number 1, but then answering question number 2, and then by the time we got to question number 3, you know, everybody was fed up, and we demanded that he show up here in person. This is the same day. This is that Friday. So they're going back and forth with that, and they pretty much come down to the parameters. The judge comes down to the parameters that she's going to allow the defense attorneys to ask Cromer whatever they feel like it, right? And if she thinks that if he tries to invoke his Fifth Amendment right and she thinks that she wants him to answer the question, she's going to make him answer it, right? So here's some more. This thing is pretty big. This is 158 pages. This is 158 pages. So a lot of this is redacted. See, a lot of this is redacted. When it's blacked out like that, right? When it's blacked out like that, this is the judge and the U.S. attorney and the lawyers having a sidebar, and they're talking about issues that they can't violate the protective order as it relates to Tammy Cowins. Now, let me get to where they bring Keith Cromer back on the stand. Now, this is where it gets good, man. So, Welby starts off with Keith Cromer again. And this is interesting. So now he's in court, and Welby, they talk about, at this point, Keith Cromer is suspended from the DEA. He's being investigated by the Office of Professional Responsibility and the Office of Inspector General, right? And Welby starts out, they ask him his name, and asks him about his status with the DEA. And Cromer says, right now, I'm on suspension. Welby, on Wednesday, we began your testimony, and I asked you a question about an individual we referred to as confidential source number one. If I use that terminology, confidential source number one, or CS number one, do you know the person who I'm referring to? Keith Cromer's answer. Based on advice of my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. Welby, Your Honor, I believe the defendant has waived his right to questions about Tammy Cowins, and I would ask the court to instruct the defendant to answer the question. The judge, I do agree with that. Agent Cromer, based on your testimony on Wednesday, and certainly with respect to this question, I certainly think you can and should answer the question. Keith Cromer says, yes, ma'am. Can you repeat the question? Then they go and they talk about Tammy Cowins. They do that at the sidebar. Now, this is the key. This is the part. Now, I spoke to Keith Cromer on the phone, right? And let me qualify. Before I spoke to this man on the phone, I spoke to him twice. The first time was for an hour and a half. The second time was for about an hour. I recorded the first phone conversation. The second one I didn't. Before I spoke to this man on the phone and got to hear this man and ask this man questions and have him tell me stuff, my impression of Keith Cromer was some idiot, piece of shit DEA agent who some rogue DEA agent who is knocking down a confidential source, and just a bumbling agent, you know, who destroys the case. And I had a very negative impression of him based upon my nigga Black, just people that I talked about the case with. You know, Keith Cromer was always just ridiculed for his role in this case. And I don't know Keith Cromer personally. And I only could go on what's in these court documents. This is all publicly available. But this is what he told me when I spoke to him. First of all, he says, Sean, he says, I was under oath on the stand. He says, what do you think would have happened to me if I would have lied on the stand and perjured myself? I said, I think they would have bust your head to the white meat. And he says, well, I don't understand what that means. But then I said, well, you would have perjured yourself and they would have sent you to prison. He said, exactly. He said, so I had to tell the truth. And and he sat on the phone with and the way I viewed him, was a disgraced person, right? Like me, when I caught my fair case, I was a businessman, and then when I got busted, my name was all over the paper, and I was classified. My nigga Black says I was a disgraced businessman, right? CEOs who embezzle money or Ponzi schemes, these are disgraced businessmen. So, essentially, based upon perception and hearsay from people in the street, this is a disgraced DEA agent, right? And typically people that are disgraced and that haven't reconciled with themselves and come to terms with themselves what they've done, they typically shy away from interaction with anybody, especially as it relates to whatever they've been disgraced with, and they live a life of shame and try to hide and not be as candid and forthright about whatever their downfall was, because they're disgraced. But I didn't get that from this man when I spoke to him on the phone. He spoke to me like as if he got done wrong, right? But he didn't. He admitted parts where he was wrong. He told me parts where he was wrong. But he also told me parts of the story which Tammy Cowins alleged that were lies, right? And we're going to get into that. So I got a different perception of Keith Cromer, right? And I don't expect you to share my perception of him, because you didn't talk to him as I talked to him. And even if you talked to him for the same length of time as I did, 2.5 hours, you may have come away with a whole different impression. If 96 people would have talked to him, 96 people would have came away with 96 different impressions of who and what this man is. That's human beings, right? That's life. We all see things. We all see things through a different prism. But I'm a pretty good judge of character. I'm a pretty good at reading people. Another thing he said to me when Tammy Cowins' name came up. This was on the phone. He said, what do you think about her? He asked me. I said, I think she's a liar. I think she's a piece of shit liar. He said, okay. He said, okay. He said, when did she start the lie? When do you think she started the lie? I said, well, I believe everything she said, including the affidavits that led to the Title III wiretaps, all of that, was all true. I think she started the lie when Cuffy got busted. He said, Keith Cromer said, exactly. He said, exactly. And we've gone through that. You can look at her testimony. She contradicts herself. After Cuffy and them get busted, she changes everything up. This is around 2013. Remember, she calls Jack Harvey, February 2013. She ain't rapped to him since July 2011. So, 15 months later, or however long that is, 18 months later, July 2011, July 2012 is 12 months. August, September, October, November, December, January, February. So 17, 18 months later, she calls Jack Harvey back, and she starts, Cuffy and them got busted. So now she's nervous, and she's not telling him what it is, but she kind of like trying to feel him out and see where he's at. Then she goes dark again. Then she reaches out, and she hasn't gotten paid from the award that Jack Harvey supposedly put in for her for the Terry White case. Remember? He put in an award for her. She doesn't get that money until March and April of 2013. Damn near 2 years after, damn near 2 years after, is it 2013 or 2015? 2013. 2 years after, she talks to, 2 years after Jack Harvey retires, right? Well, about 20 months, 19 months, 18 months, she receives the award, right? Supposedly for the Terry White case. But as you will see, when we start talking about this part today, and Keith Cromer just mentioned on the stand that Tammy Cowins told him about the conspiracy with Cuffy, Suarez, and Meech. She told him about it. And he told me, he said, Sean, the conspiracy was already going on. When I found out, it had been going on. So, my question, my discerning mind is, this is pure speculation, but if we track the facts, why did the award that Jack Harvey put in for Tammy Cowins in July 2011, why did it take so long to, well, maybe, you know what? Maybe I can't say that. This is what I was going to say. Why did it take her so long to receive the award for the forfeitures from Terry White's case? If Jack Harvey retired in 2011, put her in for an award, she doesn't receive it till March and April of 2013. Remember those two lump sums, $50,000 and $80,000. Check me out. Check Sean G out. Stay with me. I was going to say that those awards weren't for the Terry White case. They were for the work she was doing as far as the Fidel Suarez and Cuffy drug deals with Meech, the conspiracy. Because didn't one of the attorneys just ask him, was Meech going to get a cut of the proceeds? Now, let's take the other side. Let's play the devil's advocate, and let's assume that that hypothesis is wrong that I just threw out there on the floor. And let's just say, all right, Jack Harvey put her in for the award July 2011, and Jack Harvey mentioned this on the stand, and I gotta, keep that funky and keep it real. It may have took them a while to foreclose on the house or whatever real estate he may have had, in order to true up and wind up the forfeiture, the foreclosures on the real estate properties, the safe deposit boxes, the jewelry, the cars. Maybe it took them a while to sell everything to come up with a total figure to figure out how much she gets from the Terry White case. But we do know, check me out, that in documents we've read, that we've covered, that her award for Terry White was $53,000, $55,000, $51,000, whatever that number is, $50,000, $53,000, $55,000. That was testified to by Jack Harvey on the stand that it was about 50-some thousand. So she got the 50 grand in March of 2013, and then the very next month she got 80,000. Now, what is that 80,000 from? Is that 80,000 included as a part of the Terry White joint? If it was, it would have been stated in the actual court documents and in the testimony out of the mouth of Jack Harvey. But Jack Harvey only said 53, but she got 80. Now, we all thought, myself included, with my horrible perception of Keith Cromer, what I had been told, what niggas told me, and I'm believing it. Yeah, man, he wasn't no good, man. He was crooked, man. Yeah, he was crooked. Yeah, he was crooked. I'm just going along, because everybody is labeling this man that, Keith Cromer, without hearing from him. She gets 50,000 in March, 80,000 in April. Now, what was the 80,000 for? Get him, Sean. Get him, Sean. This is April 2013. We know the conspiracy of Meech, Cuffy, and Suarez had been going on. And she had disclosed, as we're going to read, she told Keith Cromer about the conspiracy, and was that her cut from providing actionable information on the Cuffy Suarez Meech conspiracy? In addition to maybe she was getting some money, Cuffy and Suarez and them was straightening her out in order for her to give some to Meech, as it was mentioned in the question. What was that 80,000 for? Right? Was it for that? And remember, now, by this time, she's nervous as a cat on a hot tin roof. Cuffy and them then got busted. And Cuffy now knows that she is the confidential informant. She's CS1. Then she calls Jack Harvey and says, I got 80,000. I don't know why I'm getting all this money for. This is what she tells Jack Harvey when she knows exactly why she's getting that money. Because she was involved in the conspiracy as well. As an informant. There were 4 parties to that conspiracy. Tammy Cowins, Demetrius Flannery, Cuffy, and Suarez. But she's a confidential source. She's an informant. So she knew exactly what that $80,000 was for. And as we get into this, she's receiving that $2,500 stipend every month for the pure reason that she's providing actionable information. And they're going to get into that. Keith Cromer's going to detail that out. And I was under the impression, and you know, niggas I know, Tammy Cowins ended up getting like 200-something grand, right? From the whole thing, between the $50,000 to $80,000 and the $2,500 and the move to get a new car, all that other shit, it added up to like $212,000. But Keith Cromer told me on the phone, he said, Sean, I don't even focus on low-level drug traffickers, man. Basically, black drug traffickers. He says, I focus on mid-level to upper-level drug cartels that we can tie back to Latin America source countries, because Atlanta, Georgia has become a major hub for cartels and their drug distribution, drug trafficking. He said, that's what we focus on. He said, I don't even do like black drug dealers, man. I don't even do that. And he said, man, he said, Sean, I done seized $80 million in cash, $40 million in cash, $100 million in cash. And not one penny ever went missing. And I don't run into this type of situation until I get involved with this girl. My track record of never being off by 3 cents my entire career, and I've seized $80 million. If I wanted to steal, I could have stole $1 million or $2 million. This was a cash seizure. It wasn't a check or a bank account. Cash. I could have took $2 million, $3 million. So these are interesting points that I needed to be honest with myself about as I'm reading this, right? Let's get into it. Stephen Wellby. Do you know an individual by the term CS1? Keith Cromer. Yes. How did you meet her? Jack Welby. Keith Cromer. Through doing a quarterly meeting, a matter after I became supervisor of Task Force Group 2. Jack Welby. Stephen Welby. I always make that mistake. I've been calling that man Jack Welby in all my videos, confusing him with Jack Harvey, but his name is Stephen Welby. Shout out to Stephen Welby. Stephen Welby. And when did you meet her? Keith Cromer. Sometime in 2010. Sometime in 2010. Now let's we just went through that. I thought it was July 2011 when Jack Harvey handed her over to Keith Cromer when he retired. Stephen Welby, is that when you became the group supervisor of that group? Keith Cromer, yes sir. Stephen Welby, all right, so you met her in 2010. Can you describe your relationship with CS2 at that time you first met her? CS1 at that time you first met her? He says 2 informants in the same question. Keith Cromer, I don't understand your question. Stephen Welby, can you describe your relationship with CS1, Tammy Cowins? Keith Cromer, based on advice from my counsel, I invoke my Fifth Amendment right. The judge, I'm sorry, Agent Cromer, I didn't hear you. Keith Cromer, I don't understand your question. When, if you're asking what the relation was, it's just we were working and she was getting debriefed. She was getting debriefed. Stephen Welby. Okay, and that's the first time you met her? You only met her in the context of this one debriefing? Keith Cromer. Yes. Welby. Did you meet her on more than one occasion? Keith Cromer. Yes, sir. Stephen Welby. Can you describe for the court the development of your relationship from the first meeting in 2010 up to the status of your relationship on August 28th, 2012, which is, we know this is after the affidavit to get the Title III wiretap. Keith Cromer. From when I first met Tammy Cowins up until it was just worked through. She was working with an agent who worked for me at the time. Jack Harvey worked for Keith Cromer. And then after I reassigned her in July 2011, which is when Jack Harvey retires, to another agent because the first original agent retired. From there in 2011, in July, before August, I had a discussion with him in reference to changing the way that they were being utilized as working with the government. I made the major decision to be more proactive on certain types of investigations that we were working and put more focus on mid to upper level drug trafficking organizations that were operating in the Atlanta Field Division. And based upon that, they agreed to continue working with the government instead of being deactivated. And part of that agreement to do that is that if it would develop into a long-term investigation, part of what we would do, we'll pay them $2,500 a month stipend for cooperating with the government on a monthly basis. And that would include identifying individuals, phone calls, phone numbers, things of that nature that would assist the government in doing their work. Welby, let me ask you a few questions about the answer you just gave. You described that Tammy Cowins was previously being controlled by an agent who formerly worked for you, but then retired. Keith Cromer, yes, sir. Welby, in July 2011, Keith Cromer, yes, sir. And who was that? Keith Cromer, John Harvey. And you said that upon his retirement, Tammy Cowins was reassigned to a different agent. Keith Cromer, yes, sir. Who was that? Keith Cromer, Anthony Smith. Did Anthony Smith work for your group? Yes, sir. He was a task force officer assigned to my group. Welby, did he remain her controlling agent throughout the time that you were actively employed with the DEA? Keith Cromer, no, he had a stroke and he wound up taking time off. He was gone for a considerable amount of time. Stephen Welby, when was that? 2013, until he went back to his department in the end of 2013, beginning of 2014. Stephen Welby, at some point in time, did you reassign the controlling agent for Tammy Cowins to someone other than Anthony Smith? Yes. Who was that individual? Task Force Officer David Aguilar. Now we know that after Harvey retires, they passed Tammy Cowins over to Anthony Smith. Right? Is that his name? Tony Smith. Anthony Smith. Anthony Smith has a stroke. When Anthony Smith goes out of work, Cromer gives Tammy Cowins to David Aguilar. They cross-examined David Aguilar the same day they did the Keith Cromer phone call joint. He pled the fifth on the stand. He didn't answer no questions. By that time, he had transferred back to the Norcross Police Department, which is a suburb of Atlanta, and they eventually fired him because he pled the fifth and he He did some kind of hearing. I forget the name of it. Some kind of internal hearing, the Garrity hearing. He ends up getting fired, David Aguilar. So Anthony Smith and David Aguilar were co-controlling her. When I assigned Agent Smith, also he was working. He and Task Force Officer Tony Aguilar were working together. So they, on paper, Tony and Anthony Smith was the controlling, but both of them worked her. Stephen Welby, you said in August of 2011, you changed the manner in which you were utilizing Tammy Cowins. Keith Cromer, in July, sometime in July, my group primarily did wire interprets with focus on Mexico-based drug trafficking organizations. We didn't work street or low-level drug trafficking organizations. And the information that that Tammy Cowins had been supplying the agents in the group prior to me getting there and continued when I first got there was focused on a different level of traffickers. So I approached them. Instead, I said, listen, we work different now. We want to focus on mid and upper level drug traffic organizations. We're primarily looking for people who are dealing directly with source of supply in source countries. Keith Cromer, and the information that Tammy Cowins had been supplying the agents in that group prior to me getting there, and continued when I first got there. Focused on different. So she was already supplying information. Check this out. Check this part out. Stephen Welby. And when you met her, you told her you were going to use her in a more proactive role. Keith Cromer, yes. Stephen Welby. At that point in time, did she give you any information about Mexican drug trafficking organizations? Keith Cromer. At that time, Tammy Cowins was already providing information relative to some local traffickers operating in the metro Atlanta area already. And when I initially told Tammy Cowins that, right after that in August, I had to take a leave of absence from work for maybe 6 weeks because my son was terminally ill and he passed away. And I didn't come back until October, sometime in October 2011. So then they go on talking about when they met. I'm going to stop right here and we're going to get in the rest of this tomorrow. Because this gets good. This gets good. So we're going to stop right here for today. And what we know is Tammy Cowins and Keith Cromer met in 2010, not 2011, when Jack Harvey retired. And that she was already supplying information about drug trafficking, about a conspiracy already. So, all right, we're going to stop right here. We're going to pick up from here tomorrow. I'll see y'all tomorrow. We're going to be on this for for a few days because this is pretty deep. I want to go through. I want to spend special attention on Keith Cromer because he's such a central figure in this case. And like the whole case hinges on him and Tammy Cowins. And I read into, it gets deep. It gets deep. And, it makes me, I believe Keith Cromer sometimes, and then sometimes I don't believe him, But we're going to get into it. I'll see y'all tomorrow. All right, peace.